Get on the wall now. He's got a gun. He's got a gun. Get everybody out. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it. Drop it now.
Why are you patting me down?
You're being detained. Stop moving.
What did I do?
Anyone inside the vehicle, make yourself known.
Sheriff's office. Gun. Stay back. Stay back.
The afternoon sun beat down on the quiet streets of Mojave County, Arizona, on April 3, 2025. For one U.S. Postal Service worker, it was supposed to be a normal day of delivering packages to local homes. She pulled her white delivery van to the curb and stepped out to drop off a few items, leaving the engine idling for just a moment. She didn't notice the strange truck pulling up right behind her until it was too late. Suddenly, a man jumped out of the truck and ran toward the open door of the mail van. The worker watched in shock as he hopped into the driver's seat. "Hey," she yelled, trying to stop him, but the man didn't hesitate. He hit the gas and sped away, leaving the postal worker standing on the sidewalk in disbelief. In a matter of seconds, her vehicle and all the mail inside were gone. The worker immediately called the police to report the brazen theft. She told the deputies that she saw the man jump out of the truck and into her van, but the whole thing happened so fast she barely had time to react. She was sure the driver of the getaway truck was a man, even if she didn't get a clear look at his face. As the Mojave County Sheriff's Office arrived at the scene, they realized they weren't just looking for one person, but a team of criminals. The truck that had dropped off the thief also vanished into the desert heat. What the suspects didn't know was that they had stolen more than just mail. Inside the van was a high-tech scanner that the post office used to track deliveries. This small piece of technology was about to become the most important tool in the entire investigation. While the suspects thought they were making a clean getaway, the police were already beginning to track their every move in real time. The quiet theft of a mail van had just sparked a massive hunt that would soon cross state lines and lead to a violent confrontation. The thieves thought they had made a perfect escape, but they didn't realize the mail van was still talking to the police. Hidden inside the vehicle was a small handheld scanner used by the post office to track packages. This little device was still turned on, sending out a signal every few minutes. A manager at the post office was able to see exactly where the van was moving on a map and gave the police updates in real time. The scanner showed that the suspects were driving toward the Colorado River. They weren't just driving around, they were heading straight for the casino area in Laughlin, Nevada. Because the crime was moving from Arizona into Nevada, the Mojave County Sheriff's Office had to call the Las Vegas Metro Police for help. The officers watched the digital dot move across their screens as it entered a parking lot at the Harrah's Casino. When the police arrived at the casino, they didn't see the mail van right away. Instead, they found a different truck with a bed full of stolen mail packages. The suspects had already moved the mail from the van to the truck to try and hide what they had done. Security cameras at the casino showed two men jumping out of the truck and walking inside. One man was wearing a gray tank top, and the other was in a white t-shirt. The police kept listening for the beep of the scanner, knowing the suspects were close by. Even though the men had abandoned the mail van, they were still carrying the scanner with them. It was like a breadcrumb trail leading the officers straight to their location. However, the suspects were smart and didn't stay in the casino for long. While the officers were searching the parking lot and the building, the men were already planning their next move to get across the river and away from the law. The police arrived at the Harrah's Casino in Laughlin, Nevada, just as the sun began to dip lower in the sky. They didn't see the stolen mail van right away, but they found something else. Sitting in the parking lot was a truck that looked exactly like the one used in the Arizona theft. When officers looked in the back, they saw it was filled with packages that had been taken from the postal van earlier that day. The officers quickly teamed up with casino security to look at their video recordings. The cameras showed the two suspects pulling into the lot, jumping out of the truck, and heading straight into the casino. One man was clearly wearing a gray tank top, while his partner was in a white t-shirt. Knowing the armed suspects were now inside a building filled with people, the police began a careful search. Inside the casino, the atmosphere changed from fun to serious as officers moved through the floors. They kept a close eye on the exits and the crowds, hoping to spot the gray tank top among the tourists. However, the suspects were trying their best to blend in. Even though the police were everywhere, the men managed to slip away from the main gaming area and head back toward the river behind the casino. While the officers were locking down the parking lot and checking the truck, the suspects were already moving again. They were seen leaving the casino and heading toward the dock where the water taxis pick up passengers. The police were only a few minutes behind them, but in a fast-moving chase, every second mattered. The quiet casino parking lot had become a busy crime scene, and the hunt was about to move from the land to the water. As the suspects walked away from the river, the police began a careful review of the casino's high-definition security footage. They needed to be absolutely sure who they were looking for before they moved in. The cameras provided a clear view of the two men as they had walked through the lobby just minutes earlier. The lead suspect was easy to spot because of his clothing, a simple gray tank top that showed several tattoos on his arms. He walked with a quick, confident stride, constantly looking over his shoulder as if he knew he was being followed. His partner was shorter, wearing a baggy white t-shirt and dark shoes, and seemed to be following the first man's lead. Casino security experts worked with the officers to zoom in on the lead suspect's face. While they didn't have a name yet, they now had a high-quality image to share with every officer in the area. This gray tank top became the primary target of the search. The police sent the description out over the radio: a medium-build male, approximately 48 years old, wearing gray clothing and acting very suspicious. The officers realized that this wasn't just a simple thief. The way he moved and watched the police near the truck showed he was experienced and dangerous. Every deputy and officer in Laughlin and Bullhead City now had his face in their minds. The digital trail from the scanner had led them to the casino, but it was the security footage that gave the gunman a face. With this new information, the police moved toward the river docks, ready to end the chase before the sun went down. The officers at the casino didn't have much time to celebrate finding the suspects on camera. Just as they were getting ready to move, security footage showed the two men walking toward the back of the building where the Colorado River flows. Instead of getting into another car, the men headed straight for the water taxi docks. A water taxi is a small boat that takes people up and down the river to different hotels and casinos. The suspects saw one pull up to the dock and hopped on. They were trying to blend in with the other passengers, but the police were already watching from a distance. One of the Las Vegas Metro police officers spotted them just as the boat began to pull away from the shore. The situation became even more dangerous when the suspects realized the police were closing in. According to the witnesses, the man in the gray tank top didn't just sit there, he took control of the boat. The regular driver was forced to move as the gunman began to steer the water taxi himself. He pushed the engine to go faster, heading south toward Bullhead City, Arizona. The officers stood on the dock, watching the boat get smaller and smaller as it moved down the river. They knew they couldn't just let him go, but they didn't have a boat of their own ready yet. The gunman was now using the river as a highway to escape into another city, and the chase was officially moving from the land to the water. The police had to think fast to catch up before he reached the next dock. As the suspect sped away on the water taxi, the Las Vegas Metro police officers knew they had to act fast. They were standing on the dock in Nevada, watching the gunman disappear toward the Arizona border. Without a police boat nearby, the officers did something they rarely have to do: they commandeered a private boat. The officers spotted another water taxi that was empty and docked nearby. They quickly explained the emergency to the operator and hopped on board. This turned the quiet river into a high-speed chase scene. The officers used their radios to alert the Bullhead City Police Department in Arizona, telling them that an armed and dangerous man was heading straight for their city by water. The police boat pushed through the wakes of the Colorado River, trying to keep the suspect in sight. The officers stayed low and kept their eyes on the horizon, watching for the gray tank top. They were now moving into a different state's jurisdiction, which meant they had to coordinate perfectly with the officers waiting on the other side. The chase was no longer just about a stolen van, it was now a race to stop a gunman before he could reach a crowded area on land. The engine roared as the officers gained ground, but the suspect was desperate. He was driving the stolen taxi like he had nothing to lose, weaving through the water to stay ahead of the law. The peaceful river had become a battleground, and the climax of the hunt was only minutes away. The high-speed chase moved quickly down the Colorado River. The Las Vegas Metro Police stayed close behind the stolen water taxi, their engine roaring as they hit the wakes. From the back of their boat, the officers kept their eyes locked on the man in the gray tank top. The river was wide, but the suspect was driving fast, passing by popular spots like Community Park as he headed south. The police used their radios to give constant updates on their location. "I got eyes on the water taxi," one officer called out over the noise of the wind and water. They knew that the suspect, Julian Vane, was dangerous and likely armed, so they had to be careful not to get too close until they had more help. The chase was a race against time to reach the suspect before he could jump off the boat and disappear into the city. As they approached Bullhead City, the water taxi began to slow down near the shore. The officers watched closely, ready for anything. Suddenly, the suspect steered the boat toward the bank and jumped out while it was still moving. He foot bailed. "Looks like he's jumping off the water taxi," an officer shouted. The gunman scrambled up the riverbank and ran toward a nearby neighborhood, leaving the empty boat to drift away. The river chase was over, but a much more dangerous fight on land was just about to begin. The suspect, Julian Vane, didn't stop once his feet hit the dry ground of Bullhead City. He scrambled up the steep riverbank, leaving the stolen water taxi to spin slowly in the current. He was now back in Arizona, but he was no longer in the open desert. He was in a busy area filled with houses and apartment buildings. The Las Vegas Metro Police stayed right on his tail. They jumped off their own boat and started searching the area where they last saw the gray tank top. "He's running! He's off of his water taxi," one officer shouted into his radio. They knew they had to find him fast before he could hide in someone's home or find another car to steal. The Bullhead City Police were already moving into place to help. They started setting up a perimeter, which is like a giant circle of officers meant to trap a suspect inside. Sergeant Caleb Brooks and Officer Kira Wade joined the search, moving carefully between the buildings. They kept their eyes on every doorway and every parked car, knowing the gunman was close by and very desperate. The feeling in the air was tense and quiet. Most people living in the apartments had no idea that a dangerous chase had just landed in their backyard. The officers walked with their hands near their tools, ready for anything. They didn't know it yet, but Julian Vane was already watching them from a hiding spot, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. The chase was about to turn into a fight that none of them would ever forget. Julian Vane knew he couldn't stay on the water taxi for much longer. As he steered the boat toward a small, sandy patch of the riverbank, he saw the police boats getting closer. Before the stolen taxi even came to a full stop, he hopped over the side and splashed into the shallow water. This is what police call a foot bail when a suspect jumps out of a moving vehicle to try and escape on foot. He scrambled up the rocks and dirt of the riverbank, his gray tank top soaked with water. He didn't look back as he ran toward the streets of Bullhead City. Behind him, the Las Vegas Metro Police were jumping off their own boat to start the chase. They were now in a race to catch him before he disappeared into the maze of apartment buildings nearby. The officers moved quickly, trying to keep their eyes on the suspect. "He's running! He's off of his water taxi," an officer shouted into his radio to alert the others. They knew that every second he was out of their sight made him more dangerous. The area was full of places to hide, like parked cars, bushes, and narrow walkways between buildings. Sergeant Caleb Brooks and Officer Kira Wade arrived just as the search was spreading out. They were told that the suspect had vanished into a specific apartment complex near the river. The police began to set up a perimeter, blocking off the exits so Vane couldn't leave the area. The high-speed chase on the water had ended, but the most intense part of the day was just beginning as the gunman looked for a place to hide and wait. Julian Vane scrambled away from the riverbank, his heart racing as he entered the parking lot of a nearby apartment complex. He knew the police were closing in, and he needed a place to disappear. The complex was a maze of two-story buildings, narrow walkways, and parked cars, perfect for someone trying to stay out of sight. Vane didn't run into an open area where he could be easily spotted. Instead, he moved like a shadow, slipping behind a low concrete wall that bordered the parking lot. From this position, he had a clear view of the entrance where the police would likely arrive, but he remained hidden from anyone driving by. He crouched down, gripping his weapon, and waited in the silence. At the same time, Bullhead City police officers were beginning to pull into the complex. They didn't have a specific room number or a precise location, they only knew the suspect had been seen heading this way. The officers moved slowly, their eyes scanning every corner and every dark window. They were walking into a trap, but they didn't know it yet. The air was heavy with tension. Vane watched through a small gap as a police cruiser turned the corner and headed slowly toward his hiding spot. He stayed perfectly still, his finger near the trigger. The gray tank top was no longer running, he was prepared to fight. As the unsuspecting officers drew closer to the wall, the quiet afternoon was about to be shattered by the most violent moment of the entire chase. As the sun began to cast long shadows across the pavement, Officer Matt Sloan turned his patrol car into the entrance of the apartment complex. He was moving slowly, his eyes scanning the rows of parked cars and the quiet walkways. Behind him, another officer was already deeper in the parking lot, but neither of them knew that the gray tank top was watching them from a hidden position. The air inside the car was quiet, filled only with the low hum of the police radio and the air conditioner. Julian Vane remained perfectly still behind the low concrete wall, his heart pounding against his ribs. He gripped his handgun, watching the white police SUV get closer and closer. He wasn't looking for a way to run anymore, he was waiting for the perfect moment to strike. To the officers, it looked like a routine search of a residential area, but to Vane, it was the end of the line. He waited until Officer Sloan's vehicle was just feet away, positioned right in front of his hiding spot. Officer Sloan continued to cruise forward, checking the spaces between the buildings. He had no idea that he was driving directly into a kill zone, a place where he would have almost no cover and no time to react. The peacefulness of the neighborhood made the danger feel far away, but Vane was only seconds from changing everything. With the police car now sitting at point-blank range, the suspect prepared to stand up and open fire. The long chase that had started with a stolen mail van was about to explode into a violent showdown that would leave no room for mistakes. The silence of the parking lot was broken by the sudden, terrifying sound of gunfire. Julian Vane stood up from behind the low wall and pointed his gun at Officer Sloan's car. From just a few feet away, he pulled the trigger, firing several shots directly into the driver's side window. The thick glass of the police SUV shattered instantly, sending tiny pieces flying everywhere as bullets tore through the metal door and the interior of the car. Officer Sloan didn't have time to think, he only had time to move. As bullets whizzed past his head, he threw himself out of the car and scrambled for cover behind a nearby wall. His heart was thumping in his chest, and his ears were ringing from the loud blasts of the gun. Just seconds later, Officer Cornelson arrived at the scene and saw the gunman still firing. Both officers drew their weapons and began to fire back to protect themselves and the people living in the apartments. "Drop it! Drop it! Stop moving!" the officers screamed over the noise of the battle. The parking lot, which had been so quiet just a minute ago, was now filled with the smell of smoke and the sound of shouting. Vane refused to give up, continuing to reach for his weapon even as the officers moved in closer. It was a desperate, life-or-death struggle at point-blank range. The shootout lasted only a short time, but for the officers, it felt like forever. They had to be perfect with their aim while staying behind cover to avoid being hit. Finally, after a flurry of shots, Vane was hit and fell to the ground. The officers kept their guns pointed at him, slowly moving forward to make sure the danger was truly over. The gray tank top had been stopped, but the cost of the chase had already become a heavy burden for everyone involved. While the gunfight was happening, the police weren't the only ones in danger. An innocent man living in the apartment complex had walked out to the mailboxes just as the shooting started. He found himself trapped in the middle of a kill zone, with bullets flying through the air and hitting the walls around him. He quickly dropped to the ground, trying to make himself as small as possible while the loud cracks of the guns echoed off the buildings. Officer Cornelson saw the man huddled by the mailboxes and knew he had to help. Even though the suspect was still active, the officer moved toward the resident to get him to safety. "Come here! Come here! Don't move," the officer shouted over the noise. He guided the terrified man away from the line of fire and behind the solid cover of a police car. Once they were in a safe spot, the officer checked the man for injuries. The resident was shaking and had some scrapes from diving onto the pavement, but he wasn't hit by any of the bullets. "Are you okay?" the officer asked. The man nodded, still in shock from how quickly a normal afternoon had turned into a battle. The resident explained that he had just been minding his own business when the gunman suddenly appeared and started shooting at the police. He had seen everything from just a few feet away. By moving the civilian out of the way, the officers were able to focus entirely on stopping Julian Vane. The brave actions of the police saved a life that day, making sure that an innocent bystander didn't become a victim of the gunman's violence. After the intense exchange of gunfire, the parking lot fell into a heavy, ringing silence. Julian Vane lay on the ground, no longer moving or reaching for his weapon. The officers, Sergeant Brooks and Officer Wade, kept their guns trained on him as they slowly approached, ensuring the threat was truly over. "Suspect is down," one of the officers reported over the radio, their voice steady despite the adrenaline. While the immediate danger had passed, the scene remained chaotic. Officers called for medical units to arrive as quickly as possible, even though it appeared Vane had been fatally struck during the shootout. They moved with a practiced discipline, searching the area for any other weapons and securing the perimeter to protect the residents of the apartment complex. The gray tank top who had led them on a multi-state chase was finally neutralized. However, the mood among the officers was not one of celebration. They knew that a life had been lost and that their community had been shaken by the violence. As the paramedics arrived to confirm that Vane was deceased, the officers began the somber task of documenting the scene. The hunt for the gunman had ended, but the investigation into the day's events was only just beginning. As the scene of the shootout was being secured, other officers were still looking for the second suspect. They had a description of a man in a white t-shirt and light-colored pants. Suddenly, an officer spotted a man across the street who seemed to match that description perfectly. He was walking away from the area, and the police decided they had to stop him immediately to see if he was the second person involved in the crime. The officers pulled up to the man and told him to put his hands up. The man, who worked for a nearby business, was very confused and scared. "Why? What's going on?" he asked as the officers moved in to detain him. Because they were looking for a dangerous gunman, the officers were very firm. They grabbed his arms and began to pat him down to check for weapons. The man started to struggle because he didn't understand why this was happening to him. "Why are you detaining me?" he shouted as the officers pushed him toward the ground to keep him still. The situation was very tense, and the man was crying out in pain and frustration. The police told him to relax and put his hands behind his back while they checked his identity. Even though it looked suspicious, the man kept saying he didn't do anything wrong. He explained that his boss had simply asked him to go outside and see why there were so many sirens and gunshots. The officers kept him in handcuffs for a few minutes while they tried to figure out the truth. It was a scary moment for the worker, who had gone from doing his job to being pinned on the ground by the police in just a few seconds. While the man in the white t-shirt was being held in handcuffs, an officer headed down the street to the business where the man claimed to work. The officer needed to find out if the man was telling the truth or if he was the second suspect who had helped Julian Vane steal the mail van. He found the business owner standing outside, watching the police activity with a worried look on his face. "He does work here," the employer said immediately. He explained that he was the one who told the man to go stand across the street and see what was happening because he heard gunshots and was worried the trouble was coming toward his shop. The employer was very clear: the man had been at work all day long. "He works for me every day," the boss added, proving that the man couldn't have been in Nevada stealing boats or chasing police. With this new information, the officers realized they had made a mistake. They had the wrong guy. Even though he matched the description of the second suspect, he had a solid alibi from his boss. The officers went back to the man, took off the handcuffs, and explained why they had to be so careful. They told him they were looking for someone who had just been in a shooting, which is why they had to act so fast. The man was still very upset and in pain, but he was finally free to go back to work. The officers apologized for the confusion, but they were also frustrated because it meant the real second suspect was still out there somewhere. The search for the accomplice would have to continue, as the trail was starting to go cold. The gray tank top was gone, but his partner was still a mystery. As the sun set over Bullhead City, the neighborhood fell into a strange, heavy quiet. What had started as a chaotic pursuit through 2 states and across a river ended in a flurry of yellow police tape. The apartment parking lot was no longer a residential area, it was a sprawling crime scene. Detectives from multiple agencies arrived to piece together the final moments of Julian Vane. Forensic teams moved meticulously through the area, placing numbered markers next to spent shell casings and the shattered glass from Officer Sloan's SUV. They recovered the weapon Vane had used, a handgun that had been fired until it was nearly empty. Investigators also returned to the riverbank to process the abandoned water taxi, looking for fingerprints or any clues that might lead them to the second suspect. While the physical evidence was being gathered, the department focused on the well-being of the officers involved. Officer Sloan, though shaken and covered in glass fragments, was miraculously uninjured by the bullets that had pierced his vehicle. The reality of how close he had come to a fatal encounter began to sink in as his fellow officers offered support. The investigation revealed that Vane had a long history of criminal activity, making the day's events the violent conclusion to a life spent running from the law. However, the mystery of the second man, the accomplice in the white t-shirt, remained. Despite the intense search and the accidental detention of the local worker, the partner had managed to vanish into the chaos of the afternoon. The community of Bullhead City would talk about the water taxi shootout for years to come, grateful for the bravery of the officers who stood their ground when the quiet desert air was suddenly filled with fire.